Hello, welcome to Cerulean Arts Gallery. Tonight we're speaking with Bill Brookover in conjunction with his Cerulean Arts Collective Exhibition, which is on view now through February 11th. Hello, Bill.
Hi, Mike.
How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm going to spotlight Tina's camera. So tell us a little bit about yourself and the show.
Well, I studied architecture in college. I actually practiced architecture for a few years, but found my way to graduate school in historic preservation. So I was really more interested in historic buildings, historic architecture. And then that led to a career with the National Park Service, working with historic buildings and landscapes. And actually, that's where a lot of the images that in this body of work came from. I'm calling the show Notice, Frame, Repeat, because that's kind of, well, a lot of artists work this way, but this way I feel like I did these. So I would be traveling for work for the Park Service and something would catch my eye and I would take a picture of it, photograph. And this is in the early days of digital photography. And so then later, more recent years, I've been playing with those photos. And so the frame piece of it is like cropping, making it into a square image, kind of extracting a texture or a pattern out of it. And then repeat, I put them all together in different ways. Yeah, that's kind of my process.
And so what printmaking process are you using here?
So this is screen printing, which is a stencil process. There's a fabric coated over, stretched over a frame, and we can coat that with a light sensitive emulsion and transfer photographic images to the stencil and then print different colors of ink through the open space on the stencil. So it's a very flexible technique, and you can kind of mix and match. And I guess part of my architecture background, I tend to think sort of in modules. And so these all became these squares, kind of 2x2, and this kind of alternating pattern of a block of color and then different images and textures on top.
So were you doing art as when you were practicing architecture, or did it come later, or how did it?
Well, I think I didn't think of myself as an artist when I was in college, but I was exposed to a tremendous amount of art. So I went to Rice University in Houston, and this was around 1970. And there were a couple who were really important patrons of art in Houston, Jean and Dominique de Menil. And they had been doing their art activities at a small Catholic school, but they transferred everything to Rice when I was a junior. And so that meant a whole art history faculty showed up, an art history library, and just tons of art. And they were doing a lot of work. Actually, Dominique de Menil was also a curator and had been putting on shows at the Art Museum in Houston. So all of that just made a big impression on me about the art world and art. But my focus was architecture. So I didn't really think about myself as an artist. It wasn't until decades later when I was working for the Park Service, and you get to a point in your work life where like things aren't going so well. I'm not so happy in my work, but I'm not quitting because I'm not ready to retire. What am I going to do? And then it also dawned on me, because I was a federal government employee, that I might actually retire someday and be able to do something other than what I was doing at the moment. So I started thinking about it, taking art classes, and was taking a lot of classes at Fleischer, and kind of landed in silkscreen. I say by accident. My youngest daughter was the yearbook editor of her high school and wanted to take a photography class at Fleischer in the summer. And I said, oh, that's great. We'll take it, we'll go together. So I looked at the schedule and found screen printing. And I'd never done printmaking, but I loved that class. Christine Blair was the instructor. And at that first class, I thought, wow, I could do this the rest of my life. And that was 20 some years ago. So.
And that's the Fleischer Art Memorial.
Right. So I now teach printmaking at Fleischer. I'm currently teaching a silkscreen class.
And this particular piece here is
Yeah, this was kind of the beginning of my process. So I hadn't been making a lot of prints during COVID, and was lucky enough to be invited to join the collective this year. And I also joined BYO Print, which is a collective printmaking studio. And so I hadn't been making much work, and so I thought I need to start small. So the idea was to start with these 6-inch squares. And the first ones were like the individual ones on wood panel. This one is actually 6 different pieces collaged together because I wasn't quite sure what color combinations I was going to do and which images in these photographs that I had selected were going to go together to make these larger compositions. So this is actually a collage together, and there's a few others in the show that are like that. But then once I got my feet on the ground, then I felt, okay, I can group different ones together. And so then you see a lot of repetition of the same groupings in different colorways, rotated around in different directions so that, a particular image might show up in the upper right corner of one image, but then you move over a couple more and now it's rotated around to look different. Yeah, these are examples of some of these early ones, these individual squares. So these are done on Japanese paper and mounted onto these wood panels. I also like the wood panel because I don't like having to put prints under glass, which we have to do when we put it in a gallery. But this gives me a way of presenting the print, as its own entity. So also the wooden panels are a bit sculptural. I like that blocky feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're more as an object.
Yes. Of course, I think of the print as an object in itself, but most people don't.
That's right.
Aren't thinking that way.
Mm-hmm. And you're taking the photographs that you use.
So these are all photos I took. So the individual squares, so I have a terrible time naming my work. And so the groupings I've called like harmony in green and yellow, because I'm thinking of these groups of 4 as like a musical chord. But then these individual ones I actually named as the place where I took them. So those are all like a New York, because I was at a historic site in New York City that had caught my eye, this grid of industrial steel sash windows. Again, I think it's part of my architecture training. If I see a grid out in the real life, in the wild, so to speak, it grabs my eye. And then particularly a grid that's got some kind of variety of texture or dark pattern of dark and light going on in it. So something I think about a lot is this kind of balance between order and chaos in our world. And so with my view is always looking for the order, but then I know there's variety, or sometimes it's chaotic, but sometimes it's just, pleasant variety within the order. So that's the kind of thing that grabs my eye then as I'm assembling these particular works. The grid became an interesting way for me to put them together.
When the grid is historically important for artists as well as a means for transferring images.
Well, exactly. I think, as soon as a human drew a line, it's a way of marking territory. It's a way of organizing information. It's a way of, if you're out in nature, you're surrounded by something that's just can feel chaotic. So being able to mark out a small geometric shape it's a human imposing a bit of order on the world. When I talk about order, I don't mean like rigid totalitarian order where you don't have any choices, but if everything without any sense of order in life is just very chaotic and it's hard to move forward. So I feel like we're always in this balance between enough order that we've got some confidence and control over our lives, while we really want a lot of variety and things to be happening that are surprising and fun.
Bill, can you speak a little bit about your color choices? Like, what is your feeling about color and your response to it and how you use it?
It's hard to answer. Somehow in my architecture training, we didn't learn much about color. I do remember in my foundation year, my architecture professor was chosen because she was not an architect. She had been trained by Joseph Albers at Yale. So we did a lot of kind of Bauhaus type foundation study things. So I remember doing color studies where Miss Evans asked us to find different colors to place, take 3 squares of the same color, put them on different backgrounds to make the small square look different. All these color theory,
Mhm.
the color is relative studies. So we did that as undergraduate, but I never really learned color. It wasn't until I was taking watercolor and then printmaking classes and trying to deal with color that I took more organized color theory. So I feel like I understand the color wheel a bit, but color is not something that just comes naturally to me. And I remember thinking as I was working with these colors and thinking, oh, are these any good? I don't know. Maybe I should mix a different palette. And I finally decided, okay, I've made these colors for whatever reason. The universe has led me to this moment. I've made these colors. Let's go with them. Let's see what they do. And of course, I guess my starting point is always primaries, and then making changes from there. But also another thing I was thinking about in this work was color as value. So not every, if you lay out gray and gray tones on a gray scale value scale, from dark to light, color actually is also on that value scale as well. And it's tricky because sometimes you think of a color as bright, but when you put it next to something else, it's dark in relation to that color. So
Mhm.
part of what I was doing in choosing these colors was playing with trying to push those kind of color value relationships, always wanting the photographic image, that top layer key image, to be the strongest thing, but then what happens to the same color on different kinds of backgrounds? Can I make the same color look different by placing it in different ways?
So, Bill, speaking of teaching, you're going to be offering a workshop here.
Yes, I am. I'm very excited.
It's printmaking without a press. Can you talk
Yeah,
a little bit
so
about that?
so teaching printmaking outside of a printmaking studio can be challenging because you actually need a fair amount of equipment to print um, editions, like similar images, multiples of the same image. So mono printing is something that's easier to do in any kind of classroom setting. So I learned this from Shelley Thorstensen to make to make a homemade gelatin printing plate. So I think back in the 20s and 30s, teachers actually poured Knox gelatin into a cookie sheet and made thin slabs of gelatin as an early like mimeograph machine. So
Huh.
if you typed your class announcements, especially in carbon paper, and then had this flat, smooth surface of gelatin and pressed the original down into the gelatin, then all the type would be in reverse. And then you take another piece of paper and press it down. And now you've reproduced your handout
Huh.
before mimeograph machines, before Xerox machines or anything. Well, of course, artists love to take old technologies and then apply them to art making techniques. So I've actually learned from another an online artist named Linda Germain of making these Knox gelatin plates permanent. So Knox gelatin, being an animal product, is only going to last a couple of weeks. But if you mix glycerin with the gelatin, you can make a homemade permanent jelly plate. So it's like the jelly plates that are commercially made that are silicone, but these are homemade. That same soft surface, so it's a great, very responsive surface to paint on, to roll ink onto, to press masked or stencils or leaf material, organic material into that surface before you press the paper down into it to get an impression. So it's a great technique for people who are new to printmaking. Painters in particular love monoprinting because it's much more intuitive and much more like the way a painter applies paint to a surface. I describe printmaking as it's this complicated process where it's very indirect because you're putting information on a surface and then pressing the paper onto it. So it takes a lot of steps to get the final image. But it also lets you put the image together in different ways than you would if you were painting directly or drawing directly on a surface.
So people don't need experience to.
No. If you know something about printmaking, that's great, but that shouldn't be an impediment to coming. It's really a good class for people who are just testing the waters of doing art making.
Great. Well, the workshop takes place Sunday, March 17th. And if they want to learn more about it, they can go to the studio page of our website. Well, thanks, Bill, and thank you for the show. It's wonderful.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, and I love the way you guys hung the show. It's it makes it really special to me. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's our favorite part is the installation. And the show is up through February 11th. We hope people can come down and check it out. And have a great night.
Thank you.